Hello, my name is Emily, and in this video I'm going to show you how I painted a magic crystal dragon in Photoshop. This dragon piece took me 25 hours to paint, but I learned a lot from doing it. While watching in time-lapse, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, some art tips, and also my thoughts and reasonings for making certain decisions at certain times. I hope this will help you in creating your own art. The first thing I did before starting to paint was I gathered references. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to draw a dragon that could create magic crystals, but I wasn't super experienced in either subject, so I wanted to find some pictures that could help me know how to draw. My favorite places to get references are on Pinterest or Google Images. These sites have millions of photos and art to choose from, but I had to be careful when copying from them. According to my high school art teacher, when you use images that you do not take yourself, your final artwork needs to be at least 80% different than any image you use. If not, you are stealing someone else's work and it could cause copyright issues. Keeping this in mind, if my references had a cool shape, then I planned for that shape to have different shading, color, or texture. If my references had cool colors, then I plan to put those colors on a different shape or subject. I also plan to use only parts of an image and combine it with my imagination and other images to create more unique shapes and colors. When I got all my references together, I was ready to paint. I started to block out the colors and shapes using a simple round brush. I wanted my dragon to be in a forest, and I wanted it to be creating a glowing crystal cave. I decided to make the forest mostly shaded so that the crystals would stand out and you could tell that they had their own light. I also started to experiment with the shape of the cave and drew the dragon in a position that looked like it was blowing something out, like it was creating something. Using references and a bit of imagination, I drew the feet, body, head, and wings of the dragon. I decided to make the dragon white so that it would stand out against the dark forest and match the crystals I was going to create. I don't like spending too much time in one area of a painting, so after a while I switch back to working on the forest in the background. Everything I change will affect my overall composition, and I like to change and work on everything equally. I don't want to get too attached to a certain position or design. I flip my picture back and forth every once in a while since I like drawing on the right side of my screen. Mere flipping also helps me catch any mistakes. I know of traditional artists who recommend that you look at your painting or drawing with a mirror every so often. If you draw something incorrectly and stare at it long enough, it begins to look normal and okay. Flipping your picture helps knock you out of that state. Your picture should look good either way you flip it. I blocked in the shape of the crystal cave with black at first, but then decided it would be easier to put it on its own separate layer, so I erased it. I don't usually put many things on their own separate layer because I like to jump around a lot and blend things together. This picture has a forest layer, cave layer, and dragon layer. The other layers are simply progress layers in between. Progress layers are simply me drawing on a new layer so that I can erase things back to their original state if I mess up. That's mostly what you're seeing if you look at my layer thumbnails. Every once in a while, I will merge my progress layers into the layer it belongs. At this point, I'm experimenting with different shapes and colors on my dragon and crystals. Crystals can have multiple colors and values inside them or on them due to their translucency, light refraction, light reflection, and the varying colors of the actual crystal. I want my crystals to be a mixture of green and blue, so I'm adding in those colors randomly. I overlaid the gray of my dragon with a cyan blue color to make it appear more illuminated with the light of the crystals. I then made the color of the wings match the color of the crystals. As I'm drawing the skin of the wings, I'm trying to give a vague impression of folds since my dragon's wings are tucked into its body a little bit. Most dragon wings have a shoulder joint, elbow joint, wrist joint, and 5 fingers with joints. The shoulder joint of a dragon's wing is located on the dragon's back above its shoulders. The bone of this joint will bend back along the dragon to the elbow of the wing, and then forward to the wrist of the wing. The fingers will then splay backward again. These finger bones are curved and, like human fingers, will have 2 joints along them as well. Dragons usually can't bend the finger joints of their wings, so it is not super important to include them, but it does add more detail. In this picture so far, I have emphasized one finger joint that is on the outside finger by adding a little knob. I then added the dragon's chest and neck scales and some of the dragon's horns. To add more contrast to the picture, I darkened the forest background using a contrast adjustment. Working on the forest scenery, I use mostly my imagination. When painting from imagination, I try to stay really loose and random and not think too much about things. The nice thing about nature is that you can get away with a lot, and there are so many ways to paint it. Digital painting is perfect for experimenting because you don't waste paint no matter how many times you paint over something. You also don't have to wait for things to dry. I don't get discouraged when I take a long time to get something right. I'm actually happy when I struggle because when I struggle, I know that I am pushing myself outside of what I'm familiar with and I'm learning something new. Every minute I spend painting, I learn something. The forest in the foreground looked boring, so I added some crystals to it. I'm thinking that maybe the dragon made some other crystals along its journey to create its cave. Since the crystals are glowing, I illuminated the grass immediately around the crystals to a bright green. Making something a brighter and more saturated version of itself means that light is shining through the object. I wanted the grass to look translucent, so I turned the dark green into bright green. With the water, I made it look reflective by adding the colors of the crystals and illuminated grass. Making something take on the color of a light source and things around it means that it is reflective. My water is also translucent due to the fact that it is showing a dark blue color in the dipping areas, and not a dark green or brown color like the trees and grass around. Water can be many different colors depending on what is in it and what's around it. My water's translucent color is a bright cyan blue when fully illuminated, and a dark navy blue when it's only a little illuminated. You can see this in my water that is in the sun versus my water that is in the shade. Water is often a mixture of both reflective and translucent light, so my bright cyan blue also has a little bit of white in it, since white is the color of the sun shining on it. It takes a lot of practice and observation to learn all the variations of water and how to do it correctly. I'm still learning. As I continue, I just keep defining more and more shapes. The sunlight in my picture is coming in from the side, so I just try to keep this in mind and think where the light will hit and where it will not. There isn't a certain right or wrong way to do this. Where I put my light simply determines where my sun is and how far my objects pop out. I just experimented until it looked right. I switched back to painting the dragon after a while. I wanted the horns and scales to be made out of crystal, so I painted the colors accordingly. I added tail wings to the base of the dragon's tail. I like tail wings on dragons, but I noticed in looking at references that a lot of people do not draw base tail wings or even end tail wings on their dragons. I did though because I think tail wings would be important to dragons in keeping their tail up when they fly. Adding details to the crystals, I looked at my references and saw that light tends to catch on the edges of the crystals more than the sides. I followed this principle in creating my own crystals. I wanted my crystals to vary between blue and green, so I just experimented with the colors. If my crystals had light shining on them and through them from an outside source, I would want to think about varying the brightness of my crystals depending on how much light is getting to them. In this case, however, each of my crystals is making its own light, so they're all going to look the same with only slight variation. I realize that drawing crystals with white edges means that the magic glow of the crystals is not evenly spread throughout the crystal. If the glowing magic was evenly spread throughout the crystal, then the crystal would not have white edges. It would either marble between colors or be a solid color, either glowing pure white, green, or blue, like the crystals on the grass. How I'm making them right now means that all the magic light is settled at the base of the crystals and is shining through the crystal, lighting up and stopping at the edges, making the edges appear brighter than everything else. I like how it looks though, so I think I'm going to keep it this way. I switched to working on the dragon again. Dragons tend to have larger scales on their underbelly, chest, and throat than they do on the rest of their body. I wanted these large armor scales to look like crystals, so I started adding light and shadow to replicate the crystals around. I also added light to the edges of the dragon's white skin to make it look like it was catching light from its surroundings. I then went back to perfecting my crystals. If you look up at the right-hand corner of my screen, you will see a smaller version of my picture. In Photoshop, this is called the Navigator tab, and it is essential to me while I paint. It is always a good idea to step back and squint at your picture every so often to make sure the overall values of your painting are correct. When I paint, I end up looking at the Navigator tab almost as much as the large area where I'm drawing. Looking at my overall composition, I decided to put more magic light in the crystals to one side of my painting than the other. This gave my painting a slightly dominant light source that added interest. Light coming in equally from all sides is boring. I then worked on the background again. This is me just defining more shapes and experimenting. Notice that when things get farther away, they lose detail and take on the color of the air. The trees in the shade, for example, lose their bark texture and get more and more blue as they move back into the shading blue mist. Trees in the sunlight will turn more saturated and light as they move into the distance. I added some more white sparkles to the dragon's crystal scales and horns, and then I ended up erasing part of my forest. The dragon felt too exposed out in the shaded clearing, so I decided I wanted it to be creating crystals in a cave. I also decided that instead of the dragon having the ability to spout out crystals of random shapes and sizes, I wanted to have the dragon have magical breath that could turn rocks into crystals. With this in mind, I made the crystal the dragon was blowing on a mixture between a rock and a crystal, so that it looked like a rock that the dragon was changing. I also had to change all the pointy crystals into shapes that look more like rocks. I then started experimenting with the cave in the background. This consists of me drawing and changing lots of rocks. Rocks are simple, but also complicated. They're simple because they can be any texture or shape you want, but they're complicated because only certain shapes and textures will be good for your composition, and you need to figure out what that is. When I draw rocks, I try to stay loose and random until things start to look right. If I'm unsatisfied with how something looks, I push myself until I'm satisfied. Even if I spend hours experimenting, those hours are not wasted. I'll end up understanding a subject a lot more the more time I spend on it. I worked on the crystals a bit more and then the dragon's breath and dragon. Going back to the crystals, I ended up making a long crystal that pointed to the dragon. This crystal shape added to the composition since it points your eye to a main subject in my picture. Notice that my dragon's tail also points to the dragon's head and magic breath, which is a thing in my picture I also want to emphasize. Good composition is all about leading the viewer's eyes around to interesting parts in your picture by using the correct placement of colors and shapes. I ended up adding little white dots to my crystal rocks to make it look like the crystal rocks had tiny nicks in them, or sparkled in some places. I tried to add as much variation as possible to the crystals, hazing over colors in some areas, and adding a bit more saturation or color in other areas. My dragon's head and dragon's wing needed a bit more work, so I adjusted some things and added some more detail. I did a final adjustment to the rocks in the background, and then I was ready for detail painting. Detail painting in this picture mainly consists of me cleaning things up so that the picture looks decent if you zoom in and look at it. I try not to change or fiddle with any values at this stage, since it could end up looking awful when I zoom back out. I just wanted to smooth out my brush strokes and add a few small and more detailed shapes. After that, I added a soft green glow to the crystals along its edges. This is the last thing I did. At this point, I felt satisfied and felt I was done. This is my final picture of a magic crystal dragon. Thanks for watching. I hope hearing my thoughts and tips while you watched me paint will help you with your own art. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon if you'd like to be notified when I post new videos.